Hello, welcome to Give Me Credit. Today I am here with your host, John Mackey, and I am J.S. Waldo. You are listening to Give Me Credit. How are you today, John?
I'm great. I'm great. It's still very cold here, and it's been an interesting winter. Let me just say that. But JS, I want to share something with you
Okay.
today. I'm not wearing pants. Is that something you needed to know?
Unless you were going to stand up.
I could prove it.
No, that's okay. We're good.
Oh, okay, okay. We'll let it go. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. And it's not cold here. It's actually the next 2 days are going to be warm. I'm going to the beach today.
Oh, you dog. Oh,
Well,
goodness.
it's true. It's a beach day. But John, today I wanted to talk to you about something. We have mentioned this many, many times.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a big gap between what consumers expect and how the credit reporting system actually works.
Yes.
Many people fall into that gap when they try to fix their credit. Most consumers think a credit dispute is a chance to explain their situation, maybe a hardship, a misunderstanding, a simple mistake, to someone who will listen, their credit bureaus, and they want to get help to correct that record.
Yeah,
But
that expectation creates what I call the illusion of conversation. People
mm,
believe they are speaking to a person who will read their story and weigh the facts. And in reality, the credit reporting system does not work like a customer service conversation. It's a large automated system built by processing huge amounts of data quickly and efficiently. To succeed in this system, consumers have to stop treating disputes like a request for fairness and start understanding that they are a technical process and is included in this massive system.
yeah, so John, let's start at the beginning then. We
Yeah,
always talk about pulling a credit report through annualcreditreport.com. Remember that?
we
Annual
got our
credit report.
obligation in there, don't we?
Yes, we always have to say that. Everybody needs to do that
Yep.
today.
Yep.
So someone pulls their credit report and suddenly sees something that just doesn't look right. What usually goes through a person's mind in that moment?
Um, I think the first reaction is usually confusion, and then you followed quickly by concern. Someone looks at their credit report and sees an account they don't recognize, a balance that looks wrong, or a date that doesn't simply doesn't make sense to them.
Mm-hmm.
The natural reaction is to think, okay, I'll just write a letter and explain the mistake. Most people assume the system works like a conversation between reasonable people, but the credit dispute system does not really work that way. You may hear that you have to write an explanation in the 100-word statement on your credit report. Please don't do that. The
Mm-hmm.
credit bureaus would love you for doing that, but don't. First of all, nobody reads those statements. Number two, it doesn't affect your score. In fact, what you write there could even be interpreted as admitting the account is yours. So don't do that.
So you said it, you hit on something critical. Most people think they just write a dispute letter and someone reads it. Is that how the system really works?
Well, that's the assumption people make. And the old adage about assume.
Mm-hmm.
They imagine that somewhere inside the credit bureau there is an investigator who opens the envelope, reads the letter, it looks at the documents, and carefully considers the explanation. That idea feels logical because that's how disagreements usually work in the real world. But of course, we're not dealing in the real world here. We're dealing with a credit reporting system that was not built for storytelling or long explanations. It was built to verify data quickly, in minutia, in seconds. We'll get into that, while
Mm-hmm.
handling huge amounts of information.
So that's where the disconnection begins, right?
Exactly. Consumers think they are starting a conversation, but they are really entering a data processing system. Credit bureaus manage hundreds of millions of credit files and billions of
Wow.
pieces of data. At that size, it is impossible to run a personal investigation every time someone sends a letter. It's interesting because they sometimes will require it. They want a letter. Please
Mhm.
explain. Cut a copy of the credit report. No, don't do that. But instead, the system depends on standard steps and automation. Most disputes are handled through automated processes. They couldn't do it otherwise. A full investigation almost never happens. And we'll talk more about that later.
Yeah, you're right, though. That is exactly what we assume because they say, write this down. So is it fair to say that most consumers believe they're entering a legal process when they dispute something on their credit report, but in reality, they're entering a data processing system?
Yeah, it kind of is. Many consumers think a credit report or credit dispute works like a courtroom where, you kind of showing their evidence is going to get
Mhm.
reviewed. They explain, and someone decides what is fair. But the credit
Yeah.
reporting system is not built like a court system or a courtroom. It operates more like a massive data network designed to move information quickly between lenders, credit bureaus, and investors. So when a consumer files a dispute, they are entering a verification pipeline, not a legal debate. This is not going to court because the system is built for speed. It has to. Personal stories and detailed explanations often get stripped away, leaving only the data to be matched and verified. Now, as a result, the full truth behind a situation can easily get lost inside a process designed primarily to move information. So, at the center of the credit reporting system is a program that's called eOscar.
Ah,
Oscar. To understand how disputes really work, it helps to understand this structural compression. When consumers send long explanations with documents and details, system isn't going to process that. It's not going to keep the full story. Instead, what it does is that it compresses the information into simple codes so it can be processed quickly. So, let me back up here. In that process, most of the context disappears, leaving the system to focus only on matching data, not the full explanation behind the dispute.
yes, I'm glad we're talking about this. You've mentioned eOscar so many times in our conversations,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting to learn about this. If a human investigator isn't reading these letters the way people expect, I expected that. What actually happens to a dispute when it arrives?
It gets translated. Simple as that. When the credit bureau receives your letter, an employee usually reviews the complaint and turns it into a short, standard dispute code. And do you know where those are handled? They're handled in third world countries, believe it or not. That's verifiable. That code is then sent electronically to the company that reported the information, the bank, the lender, or collection agency. In other words, your 3 paragraph or 3 page explanation can end up being reduced to a 2 or 3 digit code. The details of your story often, most of the time, don't travel with it. In many cases, this step takes less than how long? 1 minute, less than
Mm.
1 minute. And I'm not exaggerating. This information comes from depositions and court records.
So, what actually happens then when someone sends in a dispute with a long explanation and a bunch of documents?
Well, at the center of the whole dispute process, like I told you, is a system called eOscar.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the key things people don't realize is something called structural compression. When a consumer sends in a long explanation, The system doesn't really process the full story. Most of that narrative gets shortened and translated into simple, what is called the acronym ACDV. Those are codes. So the system can move the dispute through the network quickly because they've only got 30 days.
Mhm.
System is built to verify data fields, not investigate stories.
So you've used a phrase before that really stuck with me, structural compression. What do you mean by that?
Structural compression is my way of describing what happens when a detailed human explanation is reduced to a small code. And that computer system can read it. Your story, your documents, and your timeline may be several paragraphs long, could be a couple pages. But inside that dispute system, all of that information gets compressed into something simple, like code 023, balance incorrect. That's it. That is the moment when a human explanation is translated into machine language. The system keeps the basic category of the dispute, but most of the details from the story are left behind.
If people aren't talking to investigators, what system is actually handling this process?
Again, we go back to eOscar. Now, eOscar stands for, and I should have mentioned this before, I apologize, Electronic Online Solution for Complete and Accurate Reporting. Wow. It is the electronic network that connects the credit bureaus with the companies to report the credit information. Now, try to simplify this. It's the system they use to send and receive dispute information between the credit bureaus and the banks, lenders, and collection agencies that supply credit data.
When was eOscar developed?
Well, it was developed in the early 2000s after the credit industry needed a faster way to process the growing number of disputes. It was developed by guess who? The major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. And they electronically send dispute information between the bureaus and the companies that report the credit data. Remember, once a creditor or credit bureau receives data, it's not confirmed at that point.
Right.
With the advent of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, people have the right to dispute inaccurate information and the right to review credit reports. Due to the advent of the credit reporting and credit scoring system, the growing understanding by the public of the errors within that credit reporting system, with some error rates back then in 2002 through 2003, the error rates were hitting 78%.
Wow.
78% wrong. They need something simpler to handle these disputes.
I mean, that makes sense. So let's talk about then the mechanics. What happens inside the system once a dispute enters eOscar?
Well, is basically what's called a verification loop. The credit bureau sends a coded message through the eOscar system. The company that reported that data checks its own records. The company sends back an electronic response. The credit bureau records that response. If nothing else appears, the system simply moves on.
Okay, so the codes you mentioned earlier, those are called ACDV codes, right?
Yeah. And that code stands for Automated Consumer Dispute Verification. And these are standard dispute codes used by the credit bureaus to describe the type of problem being reported, such as maybe 001, meaning it's not theirs, not his or hers. 023 as another example, balance incorrect. Another example, 026, date of first delinquency incorrect. For clarity, we're going to put in this podcast as a download some of these codes, all of them, as we know it today.
Oh, I'm sure that'd be interesting. People want to have a visual, you can see all the codes and what they mean.
Yeah, the whole variety of them.
As we know, in the medical field, coding for insurance purposes, there are so many mistakes made. I'm sure everybody's made those phone calls. I did not do that on this day. Where are you getting this information? It's a code. In the credit field, how many credit coding errors are there?
No one knows. There is no public study showing how many ACDV code errors occur in the credit dispute system. But because eOscar is privately owned by the credit bureaus, the coding process happens inside their internal operations, and they don't like to give them up. The system is not publicly audited.
That's convenient.
Oh, yeah. Talk about protecting yourself. What research does show is that the credit report errors are common. We know that. While the dispute system relies heavily on automated code verification that the public can't see. So because of this lack of transparency, critics argue that errors can sometimes circulate through the system and be repeatedly verified instead of corrected.
Okay. Let's look at this. How long does it take for a dispute to be coded?
Now, the only reason we can talk about this, they're not going to tell you directly. However, there have been court cases where the bureaus have been sued, and they've revealed how fast credit dispute coding actually happens. People who have reviewed the disputes often have less than 1 minute to read the complaint and assign a code.
Wow.
Quick. Now, in one Experian deposition, a coder said, "Our job is to review the consumer's dispute, select the appropriate dispute code, and send the code through eOscar. The process typically takes less than a minute." Some reviews reportedly take only a few seconds. In a TransUnion deposition, an employee explained, "We summarize the consumer's complaint into the closest dispute code available. We do not send the entire letter to the furnisher." So the three pages that someone wrote explaining the situation might become one of those numbers.
So the 3 pages someone wrote, they took their time, they wrote this 3-page explanation explaining their situation. It might become one of those numbers.
Exactly. Your explanation will usually be reduced to a 3-digit code, 123. That code moves through the system, and the company that reported the account sends back an electronic response. So in the end, your story gets turned into simple data, basically X's and O's.
Yeah, that's a little frustrating. So let me just ask this bluntly. If the credit bureaus reduce a consumer's 3-page explanation into a 2-digit code, 3-digit code, whatever it is that really an investigation, or is that just a glorified data check?
Obviously, it's not an investigation. Most of the time, it's simply a data check. And, that's really the honest answer. So when a dispute enters the system, a credit bureau employee usually summarizes the consumer's complaint into an ACDV code. The code is then sent through eOscar to the company that reported the account. The company then checks its own database to see if the information matches it and what was previously reported. Instead of rebuilding the full story behind the account, the system is mostly checking data fields. If the numbers in the company's database match the system of the numbers that were reported, the information often comes back verified. That's why many consumers feel like their explanation was ignored. In many cases, the system never really reviewed the story the way people imagined it would.
That's frustrating. The Fair Credit Reporting Act says disputes must receive a reasonable investigation. But if
Yeah.
the system's basically automated verification through eOscar, how reasonable can that investigation be?
This is a question that sits at the center of the debate over credit reporting. The law requires credit bureaus to conduct a reasonable investigation, and certainly they've gone through different ways to define that. But the dispute system was designed for speed. Millions of disputes move through the system each year, so they are coded and electronically checked against existing records. Critics argue that this can fall short of a true investigation, and I believe it does. And in fact, TransUnion was sued over this. Because verifying data against some database that created it doesn't always confirm whether the information is actually correct. As a result, when detailed explanations are compressed into simple codes, the process can become a basic data check, allowing original errors to sometimes be confirmed rather than corrected.
So there's a built-in conflict of interest here. In a dispute system that's owned and operated by the credit industry itself, the bureaus, when the same industry controls the system that reviews complaints, the focus shifts towards efficiency.
Yeah.
In that environment, efficiency can sometimes mean protecting the companies involved rather than closely examining the dispute. So the system's designed to move quickly and create a record showing that a review took place, if that's what they want to call it. Because of that, the process often works more as a protective structure for the credit bureaus and data furnishers than as a full investigation into every complaint. In many ways, this outcome is not an accident of the system. It feels like it's part of how the system was designed to operate.
That's precisely right.
So is eOscar some kind of government system?
No, and hell no. And that's an important point. eOscar is not a government system. As stated before, it was built and is operated by the credit bureaus themselves, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Competitors getting together to try to fool the public. So when consumers file a dispute under a federal law called the Fair Credit Reporting Act, their complaint moves through a dispute system that is controlled by the credit industry itself.
That almost sounds like filing a complaint with the very people you're challenging.
That's certainly one way to think about it. It's a little like filing a motion in court and then finding out that the clerk's office is run by the people you're arguing against.
Yeah.
The system is built to move dispute information quickly. It's not designed to fix the system.
You mentioned earlier that eOscar is owned and operated by the credit bureaus themselves. So let me ask the uncomfortable question. Does that mean the industry built the very system that investigates complaints against the industry?
Yes. The three credit bureaus jointly operate the eOscar system. And the system, it just baffles me. Yeah. And that system acts as the communication network between them and the companies furnishing credit data. Now, that doesn't mean disputes are automatically dismissed or ignored, but it does mean the infrastructure is industry controlled. That's part of why the system has attracted criticism from me and other consumer advocates. When the same ecosystem that reports the data also controls the dispute pipeline, people understandably ask whether that structure provides enough evidence or independence in the investigative process.
Yeah, that's where it's leading me. So let me play devil's advocate for a moment.
You're good at that.
I am. If the system is built for speed and scale rather than careful investigation, is the real purpose of eOscar efficiency, or is it liability management for the credit industry?
Efficiency is definitely the primary design goal. The credit reporting system processes enormous volumes of information every day. Without a standardized system like eOscar, the dispute process would slow to a crawl. At the same time, efficiency has legal implications. Standardized verification processes create documentation that a dispute was transmitted, reviewed, and responded to. That record keeping can become important when disputes later turn into regulatory complaints or lawsuits.
Millions of disputes move through the system every year. Is it realistic to think a human being is truly examining each one, or are we looking at something closer to industrial scale dispute processing?
It's industrial scale.
Yeah, that's how it feels like.
Yeah. When you're dealing with tens of millions of disputes annually, the system has to operate like an assembly line. But nobody says that's fair. That doesn't mean humans aren't involved. Bureau employees still categorize disputes and manage the process. But what happens if they get it wrong? What happens if the code is wrong? Similar to the medical coding.
Yeah, the insurance coding, yeah.
Yeah. But the system, it relies heavily on automation, coding, and standardized verification.
Yeah, it's just so large. So if the disputes get verified simply because the furnisher checks its own database, confirms the information, isn't that a bit like asking the same person who made the mistake to double check whether they made the mistake?
Absolutely. That's a criticism you hear frequently. It's kind of like being an umpire in a baseball game and being a player. I mean, you can't do it. You can't. It becomes very questionable whether you can do it.
Yeah.
The furnisher is usually verifying the information against its own records, which means the accuracy of the dispute response depends heavily on the quality of those records. If the underlying data is correct, that process works fine. But if the data is wrong at the source, the verification loop can simply repeat the time and the same error.
Yeah, that's how it's feeling to me. So if someone imagines a judge or third party reviewing their evidence and making a decision, that's completely wrong.
Completely wrong. There's no judge, no hearing, and no debate over evidence. The system simply asks the furnisher one question. Does your database say this information is correct? If the answer is yes, the item stays.
So is the credit dispute process broken, or is it actually working exactly the way it was designed to work?
Exactly the way it was designed. They can't slow down. Their money is not being made in evaluating the credit report itself. Their job is to make money by selling this information. The system was built to process enormous. We can't even imagine the enormous volumes of data efficiently and predictably.
Yeah.
Now, that design helps lenders and investors manage risk. But the same structure can sometimes feel frustrating to us, the consumer, who expect a more individualized review of their situation. The problem is simple. The industry is often checking its own work. That's wrong. That creates a closed system where speed matters more than accuracy, because the process is automated and controlled by the industry. It keeps moving quickly, even when a consumer's credit report contains mistakes.
Yeah, that's very frustrating. Most consumers believe that when they submit a dispute, they're entering a conversation. They imagine someone reading their explanation, reviewing their documents, weighing the facts. But what we've uncovered here is something very different. The system is designed to process data quickly. And like you said, there's so much data. And along the way, detailed explanations can be compressed into these short little codes that move through an automated network. That difference between the story consumers tell and the data the system actually processes is where much of the frustration with credit disputes begins. In the next episode, we're going to take this one step further. I think it's important. We'll look more closely at how those codes move through the eOscar system, how disputes travel between credit bureaus and data furnishers, and what that process means for the idea of a reasonable investigation under the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
Yeah, because, once you understand how the machine actually works, you stop arguing. You stop arguing with it emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
You start learning how to operate it. And that's where real accountability begins.
We've said it from the beginning, knowledge is power. It helps you stand up. And that's the point of all of this. We appreciate you listening. We will come back next time with more information on this. This is a big topic. We've mentioned eOscar so many times, John, and it's so great to actually understand what that is. What is the mechanics behind all of this? Your knowledge is greatly appreciated. This has been Give Me Credit. I'm J.S. Waldo. This is John Mackey. You can follow both of us on Substack. We both have our own Substacks. Mine's more mortgage geared towards that financing side. John Mackey is our credit genius. Thank you, John, for all of this information.
Well, you guys are so welcome. Again, to bring clarity to an often confusing process. What our goal is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for the literacy, the clarity, the pull the curtain back, as you say. It's so important. You can follow us, like I said, on Substack, like us. If you're watching on YouTube, whatever podcast you're listening to, please like and subscribe and follow along. We are here every single week. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. You can also DM us directly. We answer every single last one. And if you have any ideas of things that we haven't covered that you would like us to cover, please let us know that as well. John, again, thank you so much. I look forward to next week. There's a lot of really good information.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do you want to see my pants now?
Oh, no. You can stay sitting down. But thank you. Lack of pants, you mean?
Who knows? You'll never know.
I'll never know now. Your wife would not like it if I asked you to stand up at this point, so we're not going to do that.
Okay, I understand.
I respect her too much.
She's understanding, but there are some things that she does not forgive.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't be good. That wouldn't be good. Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.